I thought I was supposed to be thankful for something this week. That's what I typed into the blank response field of the company-wide email that hit my inbox at 7:42 a.m. on the Monday of Thanksgiving week. Subject line: Holiday coverage finalized. Mandatory for some. Guess who fell into the some category? Me. After 8 years of giving my soul to Vertex Marketing Group, climbing from executive assistant to senior operations manager, I was being told that my holiday plans didn't matter. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I never clicked send on that snarky reply. Instead, I closed the email, took a deep breath, and stared at the little digital photo frame on my desk. It showcased a slideshow of memories that suddenly felt distant. My niece's opening presents last Christmas, my sister's wedding where I gave a heartfelt toast, and Dad standing proud next to the cabin he finally finished renovating. The cabin, where my entire family would be gathering this Thanksgiving, without me. My name is Rachel Chen, and I'm the woman who keeps Vertex Marketing Group functioning behind the scenes. I'm the one who remembers to order toner before the printers run empty. I create the spreadsheets that track project timelines. I schedule the meetings no one wants to attend but everyone needs. And yes, I'm the one who makes sure the payroll system runs smoothly so that everyone, from the CEO to the newest intern, gets paid correctly and on time. But apparently, I'm also the one who doesn't deserve a holiday break. The email explained that due to critical client needs during the holiday week, a skeleton crew needed to remain in office. The attached schedule showed a list of 6 names, out of our staff of 42. My name was highlighted in yellow, assigned to every single day including Thanksgiving itself and Black Friday. No rotation, no half days, full coverage. I picked up my coffee mug, noticing the faded text that read, "The Real MVP," a gift from my team 2 years ago after I'd salvaged a nearly lost client account by pulling 3 all-nighters in a row. The irony wasn't lost on me as I scrolled down to see who else had been volunteered for holiday duty. 5 junior staff members, all hired within the last year, all without the seniority to push back. And then there was the kicker. A short note at the bottom of the email that explained how the executive team would be strategizing remotely from their annual leadership retreat at Whistler Blackcomb Ski Resort. My mouse hovered over my email, archive, and in 3 clicks, I found last year's email where CEO Mark Stevens had described the retreat as a well-earned opportunity to unwind, bond, and reflect on our successes. I remembered processing the expense reports afterward. Luxury chalets, private chefs, and spa treatments listed as team-building necessities. The gentle knock on my office door interrupted my thoughts. It was Zoe, our newest account coordinator. Her expression a mixture of disappointment and resignation. "Hey, Rachel, did you see the email?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe, coffee cup clutched between her hands like it contained liquid courage instead of Monday morning caffeine. "I did," I replied, keeping my tone neutral, professional. Always professional. That's how I'd earned my reputation, after all. Steady, reliable Rachel who never loses her cool. "I was supposed to fly to Phoenix to see my mom," she said, her voice small. "It's the first Thanksgiving since my dad passed away." My heart sank. I hadn't known about Zoe's father. "I'm sorry, Zoe. That's really tough," she shrugged, attempting a brave smile. "It's fine. Mom says she understands. Jobs come first, right? That's what adulting is." No, I thought. That's what taking advantage of people who can't say no looks like. I watched as Zoe retreated to her cubicle, shoulders slightly slumped. Outside my window, I could see the marketing team gathered in the glass-walled conference room, laughing, as someone passed around what looked like photos, probably sharing Thanksgiving recipes or travel plans. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Emma. Just confirming your flight on Wednesday. Dad's asking if you want him to pick you up or if I should. I hadn't told them yet. My fingers hovered over the screen, trying to find the right words to explain why I wouldn't make it to our first big family gathering since before the pandemic. Another email notification popped up on my monitor. Mark Stevens, responding to, "Someone's out-of-office request. Approved. Enjoy the time with your family. That's what this season is all about." That's what did it. That's when something inside me, something that had been bending and bending for years, finally snapped. I minimized my email and opened the company's administrative portal. As Senior Operations Manager, I had access to nearly every system, including Payroll, which I had reorganized and streamlined just last year. The payroll that was scheduled to process the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, giving everyone their direct deposits before the long weekend. The payroll that no one but me fully understood how to operate since our financial controller left 3 months ago and hadn't been replaced because Rachel has it handled for now. I wasn't planning anything drastic, not yet. But as I navigated through the secure portal to the payroll scheduling module, a small, vindicating thought emerged. They might control my holiday time, but I controlled when everyone got paid. This wasn't just about missing turkey dinner. This was about years of being taken for granted. About watching others climb the ladder while I maintained the rungs. About being called indispensable to my face while being treated as invisible when opportunities arose. I closed the payroll system without making any changes. Not yet. I was raised better than to act on impulse. But for the first time in 8 years, I allowed myself to consider the leverage I actually had. The rest of Monday passed in a blur of meetings and emails. I smiled and nodded and did everything expected of Rachel the Reliable. But inside, something was shifting, like tectonic plates beneath a seemingly stable surface. At 5:30 p.m., right on schedule, the executive team began filing out toward the elevator bank, rolling suitcases in tow. Their flight to Vancouver would leave at 8:15 p.m. I knew because I'd booked it. I'd also arranged their private shuttle from the airport to Whistler, made sure their chalets had the right number of bedrooms, and pre-ordered welcome baskets with each executive's preferred snacks and drinks. Mark stopped by my desk, cashmere overcoat already buttoned, leather gloves in hand. "Rachel, you're a gem for covering this week," he said, not quite making eye contact as he checked something on his phone. "We really appreciate your team spirit." "Happy to help," I replied automatically. "By the way, I noticed the payroll is scheduled for Wednesday processing. With the holiday, should I move it up to Tuesday to be safe?" He glanced up briefly. "Whatever you think is best. You're the expert." And with that, he was gone, joining the others at the elevator, already discussing which slopes they'd hit first tomorrow. I stayed late that evening, long after the holiday skeleton crew had departed. The office was quiet, except for the hum of the HVAC system and the occasional distant sound of cleaning staff vacuuming the floors in another department. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I opened my personal laptop and drafted an email to my family, explaining that I wouldn't make it to the cabin after all. I included enough details about urgent client needs to sound legitimate without sounding bitter. "I'll try to drive up for at least part of Friday if things calm down," I promised, knowing it was unlikely. Emma called within minutes of receiving it. "This is ridiculous, Rach," she said, not bothering with a greeting. "You haven't missed a single deadline in that job for 8 years. You've worked weekends and evenings and through that awful case of strep throat. They can't find someone else for one holiday weekend?" "Apparently not," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "It's fine, Em. It's just one Thanksgiving. Dad's going to be crushed. You know he renovated the cabin with all of us in mind." I did know. He'd added a reading nook near the fireplace because he knew it was my favorite place to curl up with a book. "I'll FaceTime during dinner," I offered weakly. "It's not the same and you know it." She paused, and I could picture her pacing in her kitchen, the way she always did when frustrated. "You know what your problem is, Rachel. You're too good at your job. You make everything look effortless, so they think it is effortless. They think you're some kind of office robot without feelings or a life outside those walls." Her words stung because they contained more truth than I wanted to admit. "I know," I said quietly. "So what are you going to do about it?" she challenged. That question lingered with me as I finally packed up my things and headed to the parking garage. What was I going to do about it? I drove home through unusually light traffic, the city already emptying out as people got a head start on their holiday travel. My apartment felt particularly empty that night. I'd been so sure I wouldn't be there that I hadn't bothered with groceries. Dinner ended up being a sad bowl of cereal eaten while standing at my kitchen counter, scrolling through social media and watching colleagues post excited pre-vacation updates. Brad from Creative was taking his kids to Disney World. Jessica from HR was already at her parents' place in Vermont, posting pictures of freshly baked pies. And Diane, our VP of Client Relations, one of the executives headed to Whistler, was sharing glamour shots of airport champagne with the caption, "Executive planning session begins now. Work hard, play hard." I put my phone down and walked to the window that overlooked the city. 8 years I'd given to Vertex. 8 years of early mornings, late nights, and working through lunch. 8 years of being the go-to person for everything from crisis management to remembering the CEO's wife's birthday. 8 years of watching others get promoted while I was told how essential I was in my current role. And what did I have to show for it? A silent apartment, a bowl of cereal for dinner, and a family gathering happening without me. My phone buzzed with an email notification. I almost ignored it, but the sender's name caught my attention. Theodore Maxwell, the company's founder and chairman of the board, who had stepped back from day-to-day operations 5 years ago, but still held significant influence. Subject: Thanksgiving. Coverage. The email was brief but warm, in Theodore's characteristic style. "Rachel, Mark mentioned you're holding down the fort this week. Above and beyond, as always. I've arranged for daily lunch delivery for you and the skeleton crew. Just a small token of appreciation. If any fires need putting out, you have my direct line. Enjoy the quiet office. Theo." I stared at the message, feeling conflicted. Theodore had always been kind to me, had always seen my value in a way others didn't. He was old school, believed in loyalty and taking care of staff. It wasn't his fault that the company culture had shifted under Mark's leadership. I typed a gracious reply, thanking him for his thoughtfulness. But as I got ready for bed that night, Theodore's email had unintentionally reinforced what I already knew. I was seen as the dependable one, the one who would always say yes, who would sacrifice without complaint, the perfect person to dump. Holiday work on. The question remained, what was I going to do about it? Tuesday morning dawned gray and cold, the kind of November day that makes you want to stay under the covers. I dressed with extra care, a sharp charcoal pantsuit, bold red blouse, and the good jewelry I usually saved for client meetings. If I had to be in the office during a holiday week, I was at least going to look like the executive I should have been by now. The office was a ghost town when I arrived. Of the 6 people scheduled, only 4 had shown up so far. Zoe was already at her desk, eyes slightly puffy from what looked like a recent cry. 2 junior designers huddled in the creative corner, whispering and occasionally shooting glances toward the executive suite. I spent the morning checking in with our overseas clients, most of whom were surprised to receive responses during what they knew was an American holiday week. Dedication, one British client commented on our project management portal. That's why we chose Vertex. At noon, as promised, lunch arrived, an impressive spread from one of the city's high-end delis, complete with a handwritten note from Theodore thanking each of us by name. The gesture brightened the mood temporarily, and we gathered in the break room to eat together. "So," said Tyler, one of the junior designers, around a mouthful of gourmet sandwich, "does anyone actually know what critical client needs we're covering this week? Because my project calendar is emptier than this office." "I've got 2 check-in calls scheduled," Zoe offered, "both on Wednesday morning. Nothing that couldn't have been rescheduled or handled remotely. I'm literally just babysitting the automated social media calendar," said Mia, the other designer, "which I could do from anywhere with an internet connection." They all looked at me, the senior person present, clearly hoping I had some insight that would make this mandatory office presence make sense. I began carefully. "This is less about specific tasks and more about having a presence, available in case something unexpected arises." "Like what?" Tyler pressed. "A Thanksgiving marketing emergency? The turkey refused to be photographed?" That earned a laugh from everyone, including me. The absurdity of the situation was becoming clearer by the minute. "The Christmas campaign launches next week," I reminded them. "There's always last-minute client feedback." "Which could be handled remotely," Mia pointed out, "like the executives are doing from their ski lodge." I couldn't argue with that. Instead, I changed the subject. "How are the social posts looking for the Black Friday announcements?" We finished lunch and returned to our respective tasks. I spent the afternoon catching up on administrative work that had been pushed aside during busier periods. Around 3 p.m., I opened the payroll system again, ostensibly to do the final review before tomorrow's processing. Everything was in order. The direct deposits were scheduled to hit accounts by Wednesday afternoon, giving everyone their money before the long weekend, including the executive team, whose holiday bonuses had been added to this pay period, a detail I had helped arrange, and that very few people knew about. I didn't make any changes. Not yet. But I did take screenshots of the current setup and saved them to my personal drive, just in case. At 4:30 p.m., my phone rang. It was Mark calling from Whistler. "Rachel, how are things at the office?" His voice had the overly jovial tone he used when he was already 2 drinks in. "Quiet and under control," I replied. "No issues so far." "Excellent, excellent. Listen, quick question. Did the gift baskets make it to all the client CEOs on the platinum list?" Diane was wondering. The platinum list. Our top 10 highest billing clients, all of whom received personalized Thanksgiving arrangements each year. Arrangements that I had ordered a month ago, tracked the deliveries for, and sent Mark a detailed report about just last Friday. "Yes, all delivered. I sent you the confirmation report with the delivery photos last week," I said, keeping my voice pleasant. Right. I must have missed that with all the preparation for this trip. You're the best, Rachel." In the background, I could hear laughter and music. "Is there anything else you need?" I asked. "No, that's it for now. Oh, wait, one more thing. Theodore mentioned he sent lunch today. Was that all good?" "It was very thoughtful," I confirmed. "Please thank him again if you see him." "Will do. Enjoy the quiet office." And with that, he was gone. I sat back in my chair, the words, "enjoy the quiet office," echoing in my head for the second time in 24 hours. As if being alone at work while everyone else celebrated with family was some kind of perk. The afternoon crept by. By 5 p.m., the others were packing up to leave. "Same time tomorrow?" Tyler asked, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Actually," I said, making a split-second decision, "I was thinking we could do a rotating schedule tomorrow. Not everyone needs to be physically present all day." Their faces lit up. "Really?" Zoe asked, hope creeping into her voice. "Really? I'll work out a schedule tonight and email it to everyone. We'll make sure the office is covered, but you can each have some flexibility." I wasn't authorized to make this change, but at that moment, I didn't care. What was the worst that could happen? I was already working through a holiday I should have had off. After they left, I stayed behind again. The payroll system was still open on my computer screen. Final approvals needed to be submitted by 9 a.m. tomorrow for the funds to be processed and deposited by Wednesday afternoon. I thought about my canceled flight to see my family. I thought about Zoe missing the first Thanksgiving after her father's death. I thought about the executives sipping cocktails at a ski resort while we sat in an empty office for no discernible reason. And I thought about the leverage I held in my hands at that very moment. I didn't want to hurt the company. I didn't want to hurt my colleagues who were counting on their paychecks. But I did want to send a message. I navigated through the system to the processing schedule and hovered my cursor over the date. One small change. That's all it would take. Not to cancel the payments, not to reduce them, just to reschedule them. A delay that would make a point without causing real hardship. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Dad just finished prepping. Your favorite apple cinnamon rolls for Thanksgiving breakfast. I don't have the heart to tell him you won't be here to eat them. Attached was a photo of my father, now in his 70s, proudly holding a baking tray, flour dusting his sweater. The reading nook he'd built for me visible in the background. I looked back at my computer screen, at the payroll system that I had single-handedly maintained for months, at the executive bonus list that included 5-figure additions to already substantial salaries, at the scheduling button that could delay it all by a day, 2 days, or more. And I made my decision. But before I could act on it, another email came through. From Diane, our VP of Client Relations, sent to the entire company. Team, just a reminder that our annual holiday party is confirmed for December 15th at the Grand Meridian Hotel. Black tie optional. +1's welcome. Looking forward to celebrating our best year yet with all of you. Attached was an elegant digital invitation showcasing an open bar, gourmet dinner, and live entertainment. The party that would cost more than the annual salary of most junior staff. The party she was planning while sitting in a luxury chalet that my canceled vacation was indirectly funding. My finger clicked the mouse. I made the change. Not drastic, not vengeful, just impactful. Then I sent an email to my skeleton crew with a rotating schedule that would allow each of them some time off tomorrow. Zoe would have the entire afternoon free, enough time to catch a late flight to Phoenix if she hurried. As I finally packed up to leave, a strange sense of calm settled over me. For the first time in years, I had leveraged my true value. The question was, what would happen next? And that's exactly when my office phone rang. I almost didn't answer. But old habits die hard. Rachel Chen, I answered, my professional voice automatic. Rachel, it's Theodore. Got a minute to talk? Theodore's call surprised me. The founder rarely reached out directly, especially after hours. Of course, I said, settling back into my chair. Is everything all right? Just checking in, he said, his voice warm but probing. I noticed you were still logged into the system. Long day? A chill ran through me. The payroll system automatically tracked user activity. I hadn't thought about that. Just wrapping up a few things, I said carefully, making sure everything's in order before the holiday. Including payroll? He asked. The question hung in the air between us. My mind raced. How much had he seen? How closely was he monitoring the administrative systems? Yes, I admitted. I was doing a final review. A pause. Then Theodore chuckled, the sound unexpectedly gentle. Rachel, I've known you for 8 years. You're methodical, precise, and unfailingly professional. You're also human, and right now, you're justifiably upset. I said nothing, my heart pounding in my chest. The skeleton crew assignment, he continued. It wasn't my decision, but I should have questioned it when Mark mentioned it. Having our best operations manager miss a family holiday is poor business practice and worse leadership. I remained silent, unsure how to respond. "What changes did you make to the payroll schedule?" he asked directly. No point in lying. "Theodore, Maxwell hadn't built a marketing empire by being easily fooled." "I delayed the executive team's deposits by 48 hours, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "The rest of the staff will receive their funds as scheduled. The executives will get paid Friday instead of Wednesday." Another pause. I imagined him in his home office, probably a beautifully appointed space with leather chairs and bookshelves, filled with business memoirs. "That's it?" he finally asked, a note of surprise in his voice. "That's it," I confirmed. "No amounts were changed. No one will suffer real hardship. It's just a small inconvenience, like being forced to work through a family holiday." Theodore was quiet for so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted. 8 years ago, when I hired you personally, I saw something in you that reminded me of myself when I was younger. Not just competence, but a certain, what would you call it? A certain steeliness beneath the accommodating exterior. I hadn't expected this turn in the conversation. "I was wondering when you'd finally reach your limit," he continued. "To be honest, I'm surprised it took this long." "I'm sorry?" I couldn't have heard him correctly. "Don't apologize. I'm not upset about the payroll delay. I'm concerned that one of our most valuable team members has been taken for granted to the point of silent revolt." I didn't know what to say. This wasn't how I had expected this conversation to go. "Sir, Theo, please, and listen, Rachel. I need to ask you something important. What would it take for you to stay with Vertex long term? Because I've watched 3 companies try to recruit you in the past year alone, and I've wondered why you declined each time." This was true. I'd received offers, good ones, but had stayed out of a sense of loyalty that now seemed misplaced. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Recognition, perhaps. Advancement. Not being the default choice for holiday coverage." Theodore laughed, a genuine sound I hadn't heard often enough lately. "All reasonable requests," he said. "Here's what I propose. Keep the payroll delay in place. Consider it a small object lesson for our executive team. By Friday, I'll have a more substantial conversation with Mark about leadership and staff appreciation. And when you come in tomorrow, I want you to send me a formal proposal outlining the role you actually want at Vertex. Title, responsibilities, compensation. Can you do that?" My mind whirled. "Yes, I can do that." "Good. Now go home, Rachel. And while I can't undo the damage to your Thanksgiving plans this year, I can promise you it won't happen again." After we hung up, I sat in stunned silence. The office around me felt different somehow, less like a prison and more like a launching pad. I gathered my things and headed to the parking garage, my steps lighter than they had been in months. Wednesday morning arrived with a peculiar mix of tension and excitement. I'd spent half the night drafting my proposal for Theodore, going through multiple versions before settling on something that felt right, ambitious without being unreasonable, forceful without being entitled. I proposed a new role. Director of Operational Strategy, with a focus on systems integration, staff development, and client experience. The salary I suggested was bold, a 40% increase over my current compensation, but aligned with industry standards for similar positions. The office was quieter than usual when I arrived. Following my revised schedule, only 2 people were present, myself and Tyler, who would leave at noon when Mia arrived to cover the afternoon. Zoe had texted me a tearful thank you when she realized she could make a late flight to Phoenix. I'd told her to hug her mother for me. At precisely 9 a.m., I received an email confirmation that payroll processing had begun. For the non-executive staff only, as I had arranged. The executives' payments were still scheduled for Friday. At 9:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text. From Mark. "Rachel, trying to access expense reimbursement from my Whistler account, but system says I'm locked out? Can you fix?" I hadn't locked him out of anything. That was a standard security feature of our financial systems. When payroll was processing, certain other financial functions were temporarily suspended. Usually, no one noticed because no one was trying to access those systems during the brief processing window. I texted back, "System freeze during payroll processing. Should clear by afternoon." His response came quickly. "Need to submit receipts before finance closes for holiday. Can you push it through now?" I smiled slightly at my phone. Unfortunately, payroll processing can't be interrupted once initiated. I can help you first thing Friday morning when systems are fully operational again. There was a longer pause before his next message. "Thought payroll went through wed afternoon?" I took a deep breath before responding. "Staff payroll processing. Today. Executive payroll processing Friday." The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times as if he was typing and deleting responses. Finally, "Please call me ASAP." I didn't call. Instead, I sent a brief professional email explaining that due to procedural adjustments necessitated by holiday scheduling, executive compensation would process Friday rather than Wednesday this week. I copied all 5 executives and Theodore. Theodore responded first with a simple, "Noted. Thank you for the update, Rachel." The others remained silent. For now. I turned my attention to the quiet office around me. Tyler was working diligently at his desk, earbuds in, probably grateful for the uninterrupted design time. The emptiness that had felt punitive yesterday now felt peaceful, a space where I could think clearly about my next steps. At 10:30 a.m., my email pinged with a notification that my proposal had been opened by Theodore. By 11:15 a.m., he had responded, "Rachel, this is precisely what I was hoping to see. You've identified several operational gaps that align with concerns I've had for some time. Let's discuss this in detail when everyone returns from Thanksgiving. In the meantime, consider the title change and compensation adjustment approved in principle, pending formal HR processing. I've copied Anita from our legal department on a separate thread to begin drafting the paperwork. Enjoy the quiet office. You've earned it. Theo." I read the email 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. Then I forwarded it to my personal email, just in case. Evidence of what had been promised. Around noon, Tyler packed up to leave as Mia arrived. I briefed her on the quiet morning and the single client call scheduled for 2 p.m. Then I did something I'd rarely allowed myself to do. I left the office for lunch, walking to a small cafe 2 blocks away that served homemade soups and artisanal sandwiches. As I waited for my order, my phone rang. It was Diane, our VP of Client Relations, calling from Whistler. "Rachel," she began without preamble, "there seems to be some confusion about the payroll schedule." "No confusion," I replied, keeping my voice pleasant. "Executive payroll will process on Friday instead of today due to holiday scheduling adjustments." "Yes, I got your email, but that's not the standard procedure. Mark mentioned you might be able to override the system." "I'm afraid not," I said. "Once the processing schedule is set and initiated, it's locked for security purposes. It's a feature of the system, not a bug." "Rachel," her voice took on the condescending tone she typically reserved for junior staff who had disappointed her. "I understand you're handling a lot this week, but we have expenses that need to be covered. Several of us planned financial transactions around receiving our deposits today." My soup and sandwich arrived at the counter. I thanked the server with a smile while Diane continued talking. "And frankly, this last-minute change should have been communicated earlier. We would have made different arrangements." "Like I had to make different arrangements with my family when I learned I'd be working through Thanksgiving?" The words were out before I could stop them. Silence on the other end. "I apologize," I said, not entirely meaning it. "That was unprofessional. As I explained in my email, this scheduling adjustment was necessary due to the holiday staffing situation. The system will complete executive payroll processing on Friday morning. I'm going to have Mark talk to you about this, Diane said, her tone clipped. I'm available until 5 p.m. today and from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. tomorrow, I replied calmly. Though I expect it's quite busy at the resort, I wouldn't want to interrupt the strategic planning sessions. She hung up without saying goodbye. I ate my lunch in the cafe, enjoying the simple pleasure of a meal not consumed at my desk while answering emails. Through the window, I watched people hurrying past, many carrying travel bags or shopping for last-minute Thanksgiving items. Normal people with normal holiday plans. By the time I returned to the office, I had 3 missed calls from Mark and a terse email requesting an immediate conference call with the executive team. I responded that I would be available at 3 p.m. after the scheduled client call. The client call at 2 p.m. went smoothly. A routine check-in with a pharmaceutical company that wanted to confirm their holiday marketing materials were being scheduled correctly. The client contact actually apologized for bothering us during a holiday week and promised to keep it brief. At 3 p.m. sharp, I dialed into the conference line. All 5 executives were already there, their voices forming a discordant chorus of barely concealed irritation. Rachel, Mark began, we need to understand exactly what's happened with the payroll processing and how we can fix it immediately. As I explained in my email, due to the holiday staffing constraints, we had to adjust the processing schedule. Executive payroll will process on Friday. But why were we separated from the rest of the staff? This from our CFO, James, whose financial planning skills apparently didn't extend to having enough cushion to cover 2 days without a deposit. It was the most efficient way to manage the reduced bandwidth, I said, the corporate doublespeak, coming effortlessly after years of practice. With limited personnel, we prioritized the larger volume of staff payments. This is unacceptable, Diane cut in. I have financial commitments that were scheduled around this deposit. I understand, I said. It's very disruptive when financial plans have to be suddenly rearranged due to workplace decisions. There was an uncomfortable silence as the parallel became clear. Rachel, Mark said, his voice taking on a forced patience. I need you to level with us. Is this because of the Thanksgiving scheduling? The Thanksgiving scheduling certainly created staffing limitations that necessitated adjustments, I replied carefully. You know that's not what I meant. I took a deep breath. Yes, I do know that's not what you meant. You're asking if I deliberately delayed executive payroll because I'm upset about being assigned to work through a family holiday while the executive team enjoys a paid retreat at a luxury ski resort. The answer is more complex than a simple yes or no. Another silence, longer this time. I see, Mark finally said. And I suppose there's truly nothing that can be done to process our payments sooner? Nothing that wouldn't violate security protocols, I confirmed. The system is designed to prevent exactly that kind of mid-process manipulation. And you're the only one who fully understands the system, James added, a note of realization in his voice. Since Brian from finance left 3 months ago, yes, his replacement starts in January. The implication hung in the air. They had been depending on me in ways they hadn't fully appreciated until this moment. May I speak candidly? I asked. After a moment. Please do, Mark said, his tone suggesting he was bracing himself. I've been with Vertex for 8 years. In that time, I've never refused an assignment, missed a deadline, or failed to support this team. I've worked weekends, evenings, and through personal illness. I've postponed vacations and family events when the company needed me. And yet, when it came time to assign the Thanksgiving skeleton crew, I was the first name on the list. Not in a rotation, not for partial days, but for the entire holiday period. I paused to let that sink in. Meanwhile, the executive team scheduled a retreat at a luxury resort. The message that sends, whether intended or not, is that some people's family time matters and some people's doesn't. Some people are expected to sacrifice, while others are not. Rachel, Diane began. I'm not finished, I interrupted, surprising even myself with my firmness. This payroll adjustment is inconvenient. I acknowledge that. It might require you to delay some expenses by 48 hours or temporarily use a credit card. But it's a minor disruption compared to telling your family you won't be joining them for a holiday that's been planned for months. It's minor compared to what Zoe experienced, having to tell her widowed mother she wouldn't be there for their first Thanksgiving without her father. The line went completely silent. The payroll will process on Friday, I concluded. And when we all return from the holiday break, I hope we can have a more productive conversation about how this company values its people, all of its people, not just those with executive titles. Another long pause. Then, unexpectedly, Theodore's voice came on the line. I hadn't realized he was part of the call. I think Rachel has made some excellent points, he said, his tone measured but firm. And I believe we owe her and the rest of the skeleton crew both an apology and a reevaluation of our holiday coverage policies. Theo, Mark began, with all due respect. With all due respect, Theodore cut him off. This situation reflects a failure of leadership. Rachel has been managing the payroll system single-handedly since our financial controller left. She organized this retreat, including all the arrangements that make it comfortable and convenient. She handles countless operational details that allow this company to function smoothly. And how did we recognize that value? By assuming she had no holiday plans of her own. I could practically hear Mark squirming through the phone line. But the payroll delay, Diane tried again, is a relatively minor inconvenience that has nevertheless highlighted a significant blind spot in our leadership approach. Theodore finished for her. I'd suggest we all use this time to reflect on that, enjoy the remainder of the retreat, and address these issues properly when everyone returns to the office. With that, he ended the call. I sat at my desk, heart pounding, a mixture of vindication and anxiety washing over me. Had I just torpedoed my career? Or had I finally stood up for myself in a way that might actually change things? My phone buzzed with a text from Theodore. Well done. Rarely have I seen such effective use of leverage to make an important point. Before I could respond, another text came through. Check your email in the next hour. I think you'll be pleased. True to his word, 40 minutes later, a company-wide email arrived from Theodore. Team Vertex, as we approach Thanksgiving, I want to express my personal gratitude for each of you and the contributions you make to our success. It has come to my attention that our holiday coverage policies have placed an undue burden on certain team members. Effective immediately, I am implementing the following changes. 1. The current skeleton crew assignment is canceled. The BY office will be closed Thursday and Friday, with all staff receiving paid holiday time as originally scheduled in our company calendar. 2. For any client needs during this period, the executive leadership team, myself included, will be available remotely. Contact information has been provided to all active clients. 3. Upon our return, we will be revising our holiday coverage policies to ensure equitable distribution of responsibilities and appropriate compensation for those who volunteer for holiday shifts. Additionally, I'm pleased to announce that Rachel Chen has been promoted to Director of Operational Strategy, effective December 1st. In this new role, Rachel will oversee systems integration, staff development, and process improvement initiatives. Please join me in congratulating her on this well-deserved advancement. Happy Thanksgiving to all. Theodore Maxwell, founder and chairman of the board. I read the email 3 times, barely believing what I was seeing. Then my phone rang. It was Zoe, her voice breathless with excitement. Rachel, did you see the email? The office is closed. Did you make this happen? I just raised some concerns, I said, still processing the rapid turn of events. Theodore made the decision. Well, thank you for whatever you did, she said. My mom is crying. She's so happy I can be there for the whole weekend now. After hanging up with Zoe, I called my sister. I said when she answered, are there still seats available on the Thursday morning flight to Denver? You're coming? She practically squealed. What happened? Let's just say I finally found my leverage, I replied, and I'm no longer the person who can be taken for granted. Within an hour, the office was empty. I had booked a last-minute flight for early Thanksgiving morning, packed up my essential files, and set my out-of-office message. I am out of the office for the Thanksgiving holiday and will return on Monday. For urgent matters, please contact the executive on-call team. As I locked up the office, my phone buzzed with one more text from Theodore. Enjoy your family time, Rachel. We'll talk more when you return. I have some ideas about expanding your new role that I think you'll find interesting. I stepped into the elevator feeling lighter than I had in years. The door was about to close when I remembered one last thing. I quickly pulled out my phone and sent an email to Mark, CCing the entire executive team. Just a reminder that executive payroll processing remains scheduled for Friday. Happy Thanksgiving. Then I walked out of the building and into the crisp November evening, ready to reclaim my holiday and my value on my own terms. Driving home, I reflected on what had transpired over the past 3 days. I hadn't intended to create such waves when I made that small adjustment to the payroll schedule. I'd simply wanted to send a message to create a momentary inconvenience that might make the executives think about the inconvenience they'd imposed on me and the others. But in doing so, I'd discovered something important about myself and about workplace dynamics. I'd been so focused on being reliable, on never letting anyone down, that I'd allowed myself to become the path of least resistance. Need someone to work a holiday? Ask Rachel. She never says no. Need someone to take on extra responsibilities without extra compensation? Rachel will handle it. That pattern had become so deeply ingrained that I hadn't even realized how it was, affecting me, not just professionally, but personally. How many family events had I missed? How many times had I canceled plans with friends? How many opportunities for advancement had I let slip by because I was too busy handling everyone else's emergencies? At a red light, I checked my phone and found a flurry of congratulatory messages from colleagues who had seen Theodore's email. People I hadn't even realized were paying attention to my contributions. Luis from IT, who wrote, "No one deserves this more. You've been the backbone of this place forever." Jennifer from Legal, "About time they recognized what you're worth. Can't wait to see what you do with this role." Even Harrison, our notoriously reserved creative director, "Congratulations, long overdue." By the time I reached my apartment, I felt a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in years. I wasn't just the reliable one anymore. I wasn't just the person who kept things running behind the scenes. I was Rachel Chen, Director of Operational Strategy, a position created specifically for me because I had finally shown my true value. As I packed for my trip to Denver, my phone rang again. It was Mark. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but decided to answer. I was curious what he would say now that the initial shock had worn off. "Rachel," he began, his tone carefully neutral. "I want to apologize for how the holiday scheduling was handled. It was inconsiderate and sent the wrong message about how we value your contributions." "Thank you for acknowledging that," I replied, neither warm nor cold. Theodore spoke with me at length after our call. He made it clear that we've been taking advantage of your willingness to step up, and that has to change. I said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "I also want to congratulate you on the promotion. It's well-deserved, and frankly, probably should have happened sooner." "I appreciate that," I said, still guarded. There was a pause, then, "About the payroll schedule." I almost laughed. Of course, that would still be on his mind. Yes? I understand why you did it, and I'm not contesting that decision, but I'm curious, how long have you had that kind of influence over company systems? Now I did laugh. I've been managing those systems for years, Mark. The better question might be, how did the executive team not realize the extent to which the company depends on people like me to function? He didn't have a good answer for that. Enjoy the rest of your retreat, I said. I'll see you on Monday. After we hung up, I finished packing with a smile on my face. Tomorrow, I would be with my family, eating my dad's apple cinnamon rolls in the reading nook he built for me. I would hug my sister and play with my nieces. I would be present for the moments that mattered. And when I returned to work on Monday, it would be with a new title, a new salary, and a new understanding between myself and the leadership team. I hadn't just changed a payroll schedule. I had changed the power dynamic. As I set my alarm for my early morning flight, one last email came through from Theodore. Rachel, I've been thinking about our conversation and your proposal. While the title and compensation adjustments are a good start, I believe there's an opportunity for something more significant. I'd like to discuss adding you to the executive leadership team when you return. This company needs your perspective at the highest level of decision-making. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving with your family, Theo. I placed my phone on the nightstand and turned out the light, feeling a sense of satisfaction I hadn't experienced in my professional life before. I had found my leverage, not just in the systems I controlled, but in my own worth. And I had finally found the courage to use it. Tomorrow would bring turkey and family and warmth. And after that, a future where I would never again be taken for granted. Thanksgiving Day was everything I had hoped it would be. My early morning flight landed in Denver just after 8 a.m., and Dad was waiting at arrivals, a handwritten sign reading "My favorite daughter" held proudly in his hands. When he saw me, his weathered face broke into a smile that made all the stress of the past few days fade away. "Didn't think you'd make it," he said, as he pulled me into a bear hug that smelled of pine and his signature aftershave. "Change of plans," I replied, hugging him back fiercely. "Turns out I'm more valuable than some people realized." The drive to the cabin took nearly 2 hours, winding through mountains dressed in their winter finest. Dad filled me in on family updates. Emma's youngest had lost her first tooth. Cousin Michael had finally proposed to his longtime girlfriend. Aunt Kathy was bringing her new friend, whom everyone suspected was more than that. "And how about you, Rach?" he asked, eyes on the road but attention fully on me. "Everything okay at that job of yours?" I considered how to answer. The full story was complicated, perhaps too much for a holiday morning. "It's changing," I said finally. "In a good way, I think. I got promoted yesterday." "Well, look at that!" He grinned, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "Always knew you were destined for big things. Your mother would be so proud." Mom had been gone for 5 years now, but she still felt present in moments like these. She'd been the one who taught me my worth, who insisted I never settle for less than I deserved. I wondered what advice she would have given me about the Vertex situation. "What's the new title?" Dad asked. "Director of Operational Strategy," I said, still getting used to how it sounded. "And there's talk of adding me to the executive team." Dad whistled. "Fancy. Does it come with a raise?" "A significant one," I said, smiling at his practicality, "and hopefully more respect." The cabin came into view just before 10 a.m., a 2-story structure of polished logs and wide windows that caught the mountain sunlight. Emma's car was already parked in the gravel driveway, alongside Aunt Kathy's SUV and an unfamiliar compact that must belong to her friend. The front door flew open before we even stopped, and my nieces came barreling out, still in their pajamas despite the cold, shouting my name like I was returning from war. "Auntie Rachel, you came! You really came!" I scooped up 6-year-old Lily, while 9-year-old Maya danced around us in excitement. Emma appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression a mixture of surprise and delight. "You sneaky thing," she called out. "Why didn't you tell me you'd changed your plans?" "Wanted to surprise you," I said, setting Lily down and moving toward my sister for a hug. Plus, it all happened pretty suddenly. The cabin was warm and chaotic in the best possible way. The smell of baking bread and roasting turkey filling the air, college football playing on, the TV in the background, and the constant chatter of family catching up after too much time apart. And there, next to the stone fireplace, was the reading nook my father had built. A cushioned alcove with built-in bookshelves and a small stained glass window that sent colored light dancing across the floor. A stack of novels sat waiting, as if they'd been expecting me all along. Emma cornered me in the kitchen while I was helping to prepare the sweet potato casserole, her voice low so the others wouldn't hear. "Okay, spill it. How did you get out of work? Last I heard you were trapped in corporate purgatory for the entire weekend." I glanced around to make sure we weren't overheard, then gave her the condensed version, the payroll adjustment, Theodore's unexpected support, the promotion, the company-wide email. Her eyes widened with each detail. Holy smokes, she corrected herself as Lily wandered past. "You really did that? To the executives?" "I really did," I confirmed, unable to keep the satisfaction from my voice. It wasn't about revenge, though. It was about being valued properly. Emma shook her head in admiration. My sister, the corporate revolutionary. Mom would be doing cartwheels if she were here. The rest of the day unfolded like a scene from a holiday movie. The enormous meal that left everyone pleasantly stuffed. The board games that brought out everyone's competitive streak. The quiet moments by the fire when conversation gave way to comfortable silence. No urgent emails, no crisis calls, no executives demanding immediate assistance with problems they could have easily solved themselves. Just family. Just connection. Just the parts of life I'd been missing while I was making myself indispensable to people who hadn't appreciated the sacrifice. That evening, as most of the family settled in the living room to watch a movie, I slipped away to the reading nook with a mug of spiced cider. I hadn't checked my phone all day, a deliberate choice to be fully present with my family. But curiosity finally got the better of me. There were several texts from Zoe, photos of her with her mother at their Thanksgiving dinner, both looking happy despite the shadow of grief that still lingered in their eyes. "Thank you again," the last message read. "You changed everything." There were congratulatory messages from other colleagues who had seen Theodore's email about my promotion, even a few from executives who weren't part of the Whistler group, their tone suggesting they'd heard rumors about what had transpired. And there, at the bottom of my notifications, was an email from Mark sent just an hour ago. Subject line, Executive Payroll Update. My finger hovered over it for a moment before I opened it, curious what he could possibly have to say on a holiday evening. "Rachel, just wanted to inform you that the executive payroll processed as scheduled this afternoon. While the delay was inconvenient, it provided an unexpected opportunity for reflection. We've taken great advantage of your capabilities over the years, often without appropriate recognition or compensation. That changes now. In addition to supporting Theodore's decision regarding your promotion, I've authorized a retroactive adjustment to your compensation package for the past fiscal quarter to reflect the additional responsibilities you've carried since Brian's departure. The details will be in an official letter when we return to the office. Enjoy your well-deserved holiday. Mark." I read it twice, searching for the catch, the hidden resentment, the passive-aggressive undertone. But there wasn't one, at least not that I could detect. It seemed that the temporary inconvenience I'd engineered had indeed made its point. "Everything okay?" Dad asked, appearing with his own mug of something that smelled stronger than cider. "Yeah," I said, still looking at the screen. "Better than okay, actually." I think I might have accidentally changed the entire company culture with one small act of rebellion. He chuckled, settling into the chair opposite my nook. Sometimes, that's all it takes. One person willing to point out that the emperor has no clothes. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and took a sip of cider, letting the warmth spread through me. I never thought I'd be that person. Your mother would say you've always been that person, he replied. You just needed the right moment to remember it. The holiday weekend passed in a blur of hikes, family meals, board games, and long conversations. I found myself fully relaxing for the first time in years, not constantly checking my phone or worrying about what crisis might be developing back at the office. It was as if I'd suddenly remembered how to be a person instead of a function. Sunday evening, as I packed for my return flight, Emma sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, helping me fold sweaters with the precision she'd learned during her college years working retail. "So what happens when you go back tomorrow?" she asked. "Are you worried about awkwardness with the executive team?" I considered the question. "A little," I admitted. "But I'm more curious than anxious. This promotion isn't just a title change. It's a fundamental shift in how they see me. I'm not just the person who fixes things anymore. I'm someone whose opinion matters." "Just don't let them walk all over you again," Emma cautioned. "Fancy title or not, people have a way of sliding back into old patterns." "Trust me," I replied, zipping my suitcase closed. "That won't be happening again." Monday morning arrived with a fresh dusting of snow in Denver and a text from Theodore. "Looking forward to our conversation today. My office, 11 a.m.? I texted back a confirmation, feeling a mixture of anticipation and resolve as I boarded my flight back to the city. The weekend away had given me perspective I'd been lacking, reminding me why work-life balance mattered, why I couldn't keep sacrificing personal time on the altar of corporate dedication. The office was strangely quiet when I arrived just after 9 a.m., as if the building itself was holding its breath. A few curious glances followed me as I made my way to my workspace, colleagues clearly wondering how the dynamics had shifted during the holiday break. Zoe was waiting beside my office door, a coffee cup in each hand and a nervous smile on her face. "Welcome back, Director Chen," she said, offering me one of the cups. "I got your usual, dark roast, splash of cream, no sugar." "Thank you," I said, accepting the coffee with a smile. "And how was your Thanksgiving with your mom?" Her face softened. "It was healing. We cried a lot, but we laughed too. Remembered Dad in all the right ways. I wouldn't have had that if you hadn't rearranged the schedule. I owe you." "You don't owe me anything," I assured her. "I'm just glad you got to be where you needed to be." As I settled at my desk, I noticed a large manila envelope centered prominently on my keyboard. My name was written across it in Theodore's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a formal letter on company letterhead, outlining the details of my promotion. The substantial salary increase, the expanded responsibilities, the equity offer that would give me a small but significant ownership stake in the company I'd helped build. Attached was a handwritten note. "This is just the beginning. See you at 11. T." The morning passed quickly as I caught up on emails and messages from the holiday break. Despite my absence, nothing had fallen apart, a realization that was both reassuring and slightly humbling. The company could function without me for a few days. I wasn't as indispensable as I'd believed, which was actually freeing rather than threatening. At 10:55 a.m., I gathered my notes and made my way to Theodore's office on the top floor, a space I'd visited many times over the years, but always as the person bringing information or solving problems, never as someone being invited as a strategic equal. His assistant waved me directly in, another small indicator of my changing status. In the past, I'd always had to wait, regardless of whether Theodore was actually occupied. The office was exactly as I remembered, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline, walls adorned with framed vintage advertisements from Vertex's earliest campaigns, and the massive oak desk that had been with Theodore since he founded the company. But today, he wasn't sitting behind the desk. Instead, he was standing by the windows, gazing out at the city below. He turned when I entered, a warm smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Rachel," he said, gesturing to the seating area rather than the chairs in front of his desk. "Thank you for coming. How was your Thanksgiving?" "Surprisingly wonderful," I replied honestly. "Exactly what I needed." Good. He settled into one of the leather armchairs, indicating I should take the other. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since our conversation last week. About leadership, about value, about the culture we've created here at Vertex." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "When I started this company 20 years ago, I had very clear ideas about how people should be treated," he said, his tone reflective. "Somewhere along the way, as we grew and success came, some of those principles got diluted. That happens in many growing companies," I offered, not wanting to seem accusatory. "It does, but that doesn't make it right." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What you did with the payroll, it was a wake-up call, not just for Mark and the executive team, but for me. I've been too hands-off, too willing to let others shape the company culture while I focused on strategic direction." This level of candor from Theodore was unexpected. In 8 years, I'd never heard him admit to any missteps. "I read your proposal thoroughly," he continued. "The role you outlined, Director of Operational Strategy, it's a good start, but I'm thinking bigger." He reached for a folder on the coffee table between us and handed it to me. "Take a look." Inside was a new organizational chart for Vertex. At the very top was Theodore as founder and chairman. Directly below him, in a newly created position, was my name beside the title, Chief Operations Officer. I looked up, sure I had misunderstood. "COO? But James is our CFO," Theodore clarified. "He handles our finances, but operations has always been a fragmented responsibility, divided among different departments without central oversight. That's been a weakness in our structure, one that became glaringly obvious during this incident." I studied the chart again, noting how the position would give me authority over systems, processes, and personnel across all departments. It wasn't just a promotion. It was a complete restructuring with me at its center. "This is significant," I said carefully. "It's necessary," Theodore replied firmly. "And it's overdue. You've been functioning as our de facto COO for years, just without the title, compensation, or authority. That changes now." He reached for another document and passed it to me. "Here's the compensation package. Take your time reviewing it. It's commensurate with the role and includes the equity stake we discussed." I scanned the numbers, momentarily speechless. The salary was more than double what I'd been making, with a bonus structure tied to company performance that could increase it substantially further. The equity grant would make me one of the largest individual shareholders after Theodore himself. "This is very generous," I managed to say. "It's not generous, Rachel. It's fair. There's a difference." His expression was serious now. "What this company did to you, what I allowed to happen, wasn't fair. You were undervalued and overutilized. That's not how I want Vertex to operate." I took a deep breath, processing everything he was offering. "And the executive team? How do they feel about this restructuring?" Theodore's smile turned slightly wry. "Let's just say that having their financial comfort disrupted for 48 hours has made them remarkably open to organizational changes. But more importantly, they've seen what happens when we take certain contributions for granted. It was a powerful, object lesson." "And Mark specifically?" I pressed, knowing that the CEO would be the most likely source of resistance. "Mark and I have had several lengthy conversations since Wednesday," Theodore said carefully. "He recognizes that his leadership style needs adjustment. And he understands that having a strong COO focused on operational excellence will actually make his job easier in the long run. In other words, Theodore had made it clear this wasn't optional. Mark would adapt or face consequences of his own. When would this take effect? I asked, still trying to absorb the magnitude of what was being proposed. Immediately. We'll announce it company-wide this afternoon. He leaned back in his chair. Unless you need time to consider the offer? Did I? This was far beyond what I'd envisioned when I made that small adjustment to the payroll schedule. I'd been hoping for recognition, respect, maybe a meaningful promotion. This was a seismic shift in my career trajectory and in the company's structure. But as I looked at the organizational chart again, I realized it made perfect sense. The roles and responsibilities aligned with what I'd already been managing, just with the appropriate authority to match. This wasn't charity or overcompensation. For a slight, it was a correction of a long-standing imbalance. I don't need time, I said with a confidence that surprised even me. I accept. Theodore's face broke into a genuine smile. Excellent. I was hoping you'd say that. He stood and extended his hand. Congratulations, Rachel. Welcome to the C-suite. As we shook hands, I felt the weight of 8 years of quiet frustration finally lifting. This wasn't just about a title or a salary. It was about being valued, truly valued, for what I contributed. There's one more thing, Theodore said as he walked me toward the door. The executive retreat policy is being revised. In the future, no off-site planning sessions will be scheduled during major holidays, and any all-hands meetings will include representation from all departments, not just leadership. Small changes, but meaningful ones that indicated a shift in thinking about whose time and contributions mattered. That sounds like a positive step, I agreed. It's a start, he replied. I'm counting on you to help identify other areas where we need to realign our practices with our values. That's part of your new role, making sure Vertex doesn't just talk about valuing its people, but actually does it, consistently and equitably. As I left Theodore's office, I felt strangely light, as if I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying, for years without even realizing its weight. The path from senior operations manager to chief operations officer wasn't one I'd mapped out or strategized toward. It had emerged organically from a moment of justified rebellion, a small act of self-advocacy that had rippled outward to create institutional change. Back at my desk, I found an email from Mark, time-stamped just minutes ago. Rachel, Theodore has briefed me on your new role. While the circumstances that led to this restructuring were unconventional, I recognize the value you bring to Vertex and look forward to working with you in this new capacity. I've scheduled time on Wednesday for us to discuss how to optimize the CEO-COO dynamic going forward. Congratulations on the well-deserved promotion. Mark. Professional, diplomatic, without the warmth of his Thanksgiving Day message, but also without any hint of resentment or resistance. It was a start. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Just heard the rumors about a big announcement this afternoon. Something about a new C-level position? Is it what I think it is? I smiled, but didn't respond. The official announcement would come soon enough. Instead, I opened my calendar and created a recurring event. Family time. Do not schedule over. Every Sunday evening, blocked off as non-negotiable personal time. A small change, but a symbolic one. A reminder to myself and to others that my value wasn't measured solely by my availability. At 2 p.m. sharp, an all-staff email arrived from Theodore, announcing my appointment as Chief Operations Officer, effective immediately. Within seconds, my phone and email began lighting up with congratulatory messages from colleagues across the company. Amidst the digital flood of good wishes, my office door opened and Theodore stepped in, followed by his assistant carrying a bottle of champagne and a tray of glasses. I thought we should mark the occasion properly, he said with a smile. as more curious staff members began gathering in the doorway. As Theodore popped the cork and began pouring, I caught a glimpse of Mark hovering at the edge of the growing crowd, his expression unreadable. Our eyes met briefly before he nodded, not quite congratulatory, but acknowledging. Then he stepped forward, accepted a glass, and joined the impromptu celebration. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of congratulations, questions about my new role, and the slightly surreal experience of being the center of attention after years of working effectively in the background. By 5 p.m., as people began filtering out for the day, I found myself alone in my office once more, contemplating the whirlwind transformation of the past week. From being assigned holiday coverage while others vacationed, to becoming the second highest ranking executive in the company, all because I'd finally found my leverage and had the courage to use it. As I packed up to leave, Zoe appeared in my doorway one last time. "Sorry to bother you, Ms. Koo," she said with a playful smile, "but I wanted to give you something." She handed me a small gift bag. Inside was a coffee mug with the words, "The Real MVP" printed on it, identical to my old one but new and unmarked by years of use. "I noticed your old one was pretty faded," she explained. "Thought you might need a fresh start to go with the new title." I turned the mug in my hands, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you, Zoe. This means a lot." "You know," she said, hesitantly, "what you did last week, standing up for yourself, for all of us really, it changed things around here. Not just the policies or the org chart, but the feeling. People are talking about it. About how maybe we don't have to just accept whatever gets handed down." I hadn't considered the broader impact of my actions. I'd been focused on my own situation, my own need for recognition. But of course, in a company this size, ripples spread. "Be the change you want to see, right?" I offered with a small smile. "Something like that," she agreed. "Anyway, congratulations again. If anyone deserves this, it's you." After she left, I placed the new mug prominently on my desk, a visible reminder of both where I'd been and where I was going. Then I gathered my things and headed for the elevator, my new company key card, the one that granted access to the executive floor, heavy in my pocket. As the elevator doors closed, I thought about Theodore's words from earlier. This wasn't charity or generosity. It was fairness. It was correction. It was the company finally recognizing what I'd been delivering all along. I stepped out into the November evening, the city lights glimmering against the early darkness. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "So, did they grovel appropriately on your first day back as a corporate badass?" I smiled and typed a response. "No groveling required, just proper recognition finally. Chief Operations Officer has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Her response came instantly. "Holy shit, Rachel! Mom would be doing backflips!" And she would have been. My mother, who taught me to know my worth but never quite managed to fully claim her own. Who encouraged me to reach higher but sometimes settled for less herself. Who would have been so proud to see me not just succeed, but demand the recognition I deserved. As I walked to my car, I made a mental note to visit her grave soon, to tell her about everything that had happened. About how I'd finally found my voice, my leverage, my proper place. About how sometimes the smallest act of self-advocacy can create the biggest change. They had made me work Thanksgiving week while everyone else vacationed, but they had forgotten I scheduled all their payroll. And in forgetting that one crucial detail, they had inadvertently set in motion a transformation that would benefit not just me, but perhaps the entire company culture. All because I finally understood my true value and insisted that others recognize it too. 2 weeks into my role as Chief Operations Officer, the reality of my new position was starting to sink in. My office had been relocated to the executive floor, a spacious corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows and furnishings that made my previous workspace look like a storage closet by comparison. My calendar was now managed by Elise, Theodore's former assistant who had been reassigned to support me, and my inbox was flooded with meeting requests, strategy documents, and congratulatory messages from clients who had heard about my promotion. The transition hadn't been entirely smooth. Several department heads who had previously seen me as a peer, or worse, as support staff, were struggling to adjust to my new authority. James, our CFO, had been particularly resistant, challenging my input during executive meetings with thinly veiled skepticism. "Rachel," he said during one particularly tense budget review, "while I appreciate your enthusiasm, financial allocation has always been my domain. These suggestions represent a significant departure from our established practices." I met his gaze steadily across the conference table, aware of the others watching our exchange. "That's precisely the point, James. Our established practices created an environment where key operational staff were undervalued and overworked. The restructuring I'm proposing addresses those imbalances while actually improving our efficiency metrics." Theodore, at the head of the table, nodded slightly. "I think Rachel's approach merits serious consideration. The data supports her conclusions." James's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further. Small victories. Mark had been more diplomatic, but no less challenging. Our Wednesday meeting to optimize the CEO-COO dynamic had been a carefully choreographed dance around his discomfort with my rapid ascension. He spoke about collaboration and shared vision while subtly attempting to define my role as narrowly as possible. "I see the COO position as primarily focused on internal efficiencies," he suggested, leaning back in his chair with practiced casualness. "Day-to-day operations, system maintenance, staff scheduling, the areas where you've always excelled." "That's certainly part of it," I agreed pleasantly. "But the role as Theodore and I have defined it encompasses strategic planning, client, experience architecture, and organizational development as well. In fact, I'll be leading the presentation to the Westridge account next week." The Westridge account, our largest potential new client, one Mark had been personally courting for months. His smile flickered just slightly. "Interesting approach," he said. "I hadn't been informed of that change." "The brief is in your inbox," I replied. "Sent yesterday afternoon. Elise confirmed your receipt." Another small victory. Establishing boundaries, claiming space, refusing to be sidelined or diminished, even subtly. Not everyone was resistant to the changes, of course. Many staff members, particularly those who had been overlooked or underappreciated in the old structure, were energized by my elevation and the cultural shift it signaled. Zoe had been among the first to volunteer for the new Operations Excellence Committee I'd formed, a cross-departmental team focused on identifying inefficiencies and improving workflows. Tyler from design had approached me with ideas for streamlining the creative approval process. Even Diane, after her initial frostiness, had grudgingly acknowledged that my restructuring of the client onboarding sequence had improved satisfaction metrics. It was Tuesday morning, and I was reviewing the quarter's performance data in preparation for the afternoon's executive meeting when my door opened without a knock. Theodore walked in, coffee mug in hand, looking more casual than usual in a sweater rather than his typical suit jacket. "Got a minute?" he asked, though he was already settling into one of the chairs opposite my desk. "Always," I replied, closing my laptop. In the past, I would have anxiously wondered what problem needed solving or what crisis had erupted. Now, I simply waited, comfortable in the knowledge that whatever it was, we would address it as equals. "The Westridge presentation," he began. "Mark came to see me about it yesterday." "Let me guess. He thinks he should lead it instead of me." Theodore's lips quirked in a half smile. Not in those exact words, but essentially, yes. He feels that as CEO, he should be the face of major client acquisitions. I considered this. "And what do you think?" "I think," he said carefully, "that Mark is still adjusting to the new dynamic. His identity has been wrapped up in being The unquestioned leader of Vertex for so long that sharing that spotlight is challenging for him. "So you want me to step back?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "On the contrary," Theodore replied. "I want you to lead the presentation exactly as planned, but I also think we need to be strategic about bringing Mark along in this transition, rather than creating unnecessary friction." I nodded slowly. "I'm open to suggestions. Include him meaningfully in the presentation. Give him the parts that showcase his strengths. Make it collaborative rather than competitive." It was a fair point. My goal wasn't to diminish Mark or prove something at his expense. It was to reshape Vertex's culture into something more equitable, more respectful of everyone's contributions. "I can do that," I agreed. "I'll restructure the presentation to highlight both our roles." Theodore smiled, looking relieved. "This is why I wanted you in this position, Rachel. You're not just operationally brilliant. You understand the human element, the politics and personalities that make an organization work. Or not work," I added wryly. "Indeed." He stood, indicating our impromptu meeting was wrapping up. "By the way, the board was impressed with your first month's initiatives. The operational efficiency gains are already showing up in the preliminary numbers." "We had a lot of low-hanging fruit," I said. "Systems and processes that had been neglected because no one had the authority to address them properly." "Well, you certainly have that authority now," he noted. "Use it wisely." After he left, I turned to the window, gazing out at the city skyline as I thought about the delicate balance I was trying to maintain. Asserting my new authority without wielding it like a weapon. Changing entrenched patterns without alienating long-term colleagues. Creating space for myself without unnecessarily restricting others. It was a complex dance, far more nuanced than the simple payroll adjustment that had started this whole transformation. That had been a moment of impulse, of justified rebellion. This was the harder part, the sustained, thoughtful rebuilding of a corporate culture that had drifted away from its founding values. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. "Mini crisis in the creative department. Tyler and Harrison are at odds about the Blue Water campaign direction. Could use your perspective if you have 10 minutes. In the past, I would have dropped everything to rush down and mediate. It was what Rachel the Reliable did. Solved problems, soothed egos, kept the peace at all costs. But Rachel the COO had different priorities and different boundaries. I texted back, "In prep for executive meeting. Could you bring them to my office at 2 p.m.? Her response came quickly. "Will do, thanks." Another small adjustment. Not saying no to helping, but establishing that my time had value. That problems could wait for scheduled slots rather than demanding immediate attention. The afternoon executive meeting was held in the main conference room, a sleek space with views of the park and a massive table that always reminded me of something from a movie about corporate power. Today, for the first time, I was presenting the operational overview that opened each session, a responsibility that had previously fallen to various department heads on a rotating basis. Q4 is tracking 7% above projected targets, I explained, clicking through to a slide showing key performance indicators. The efficiency measures we implemented in weeks 2 and 3 have already reduced overhead by approximately $42,000, with additional savings expected as the changes are fully adopted. James shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with someone else presenting financial impacts. "Those numbers seem optimistic. Have they been verified by finance?" "They've been verified by your team, yes," I replied smoothly. "Elena ran the analysis and confirmed the findings yesterday afternoon. I believe you were copied on her report?" He had been, and we both knew it. This was posturing, not genuine concern about accuracy. Mark leaned forward. "These are impressive early results, Rachel. What's your projection for Q1 of next year if these trends continue?" An olive branch, a public acknowledgement of the value I was bringing. Conservative estimates put us at 12% above current targets, I said. But I believe we can push that to 15% if we implement the second phase of restructuring on schedule. Theodore nodded approvingly. That would put us in an excellent position for the expansion we've been discussing. The meeting continued with updates from other departments, with me no longer just listening or taking notes, but actively engaging as a key decision maker. When marketing presented their campaign for a new client, I asked pointed questions about resource allocation that exposed several inefficiencies. When HR discussed hiring plans, I pushed back on unnecessary additions while advocating for strengthening departments that had been chronically understaffed. It was, I realized, the role I had been informally playing for years, identifying problems, suggesting solutions, keeping the organization functioning smoothly, but now with the authority and recognition to make those insights actionable. After the meeting, Mark caught up with me in the hallway. I reviewed your revised plan for the Westridge presentation, he said, falling into step beside me. The structure makes sense. Good balance. I'm glad you think so, I replied. They're an important potential client. We need to present a unified executive vision. He nodded, hesitating before adding, I may have been resistant to some of the changes you've implemented, old habits and all that. It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get from Mark Stevens, CEO and career corporate politician. Change is difficult, I acknowledged, for everyone. But necessary, he admitted, surprising me with his candor. The company had drifted from some of its founding principles. Theodore was right to correct course. We reached my office and I paused at the door. The Westridge presentation will go well, I said with confidence. We make a good team when we're both valued appropriately. He met my eyes, understanding the subtle reminder of how we'd arrived at this new arrangement. Indeed we do, he said finally. See you at prep tomorrow. As he walked away, I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. Not the vindictive pleasure of having won a power struggle, but the deeper satisfaction of having created a more balanced, more equitable dynamic, one that would ultimately benefit not just me, but the entire organization. The rest of the week passed in a blur of meetings, decisions, and adjustments as I continued to settle into my new role. By Friday afternoon, I was ready for a break from the intensity of executive-level responsibilities. I found myself drifting down to the creative department, where the energy was always different. More chaotic, but also more vibrant, with music playing softly and concept boards lining the walls. Tyler spotted me first, his eyes widening slightly, at the unusual sight of a C-suite executive in the creative bullpen. Ms. Chen, Rachel is still fine, I assured him with a smile. Just because my office moved up a few floors doesn't mean we need to stand on ceremony. He relaxed visibly. What brings you to our humble domain? Not another crisis, I hope? Actually, I came to see how the Blue Water campaign is progressing. I know you and Harrison were at odds about the direction. We were, he confirmed, leading me toward a large display board covered with mock-ups. But we found a compromise that actually works better than either of our original concepts. I studied the board, noting how the design elements had evolved from the initial brief I'd seen weeks ago. It's strong, I said honestly. Much more cohesive than the earlier versions. Harrison appeared from the break room, coffee in hand, and did a double take when he saw me. Rachel, didn't expect to see you down here in the trenches. Just checking in on Blue Water, I explained. The work looks excellent. He nodded, some of his usual gruffness softening. Tyler's idea about integrating the legacy elements with the modern aesthetic was not terrible, he admitted, which from Harrison was high praise indeed. And Harrison's typography suggestions gave the whole thing a more premium feel, Tyler added, the mutual respect evident in their interaction. This was what I had missed most since my promotion. The daily creative energy, the problem-solving at the ground level, the collaborative spirit that sometimes got lost in executive discussions about strategy and metrics. "I'd like to institute something," I said suddenly. "A weekly walkthrough where I visit different departments, not for formal reviews, but just to stay connected to the work happening throughout the company. Would that be welcomed or seen as executive meddling?" Tyler and Harrison exchanged glances. "Honestly," Harrison said, "it would be refreshing. Most of the executives only appear when there's a problem or when they need to show off the department to a client." Tyler nodded in agreement. "Having someone from the C-suite who actually understands what we do and cares about the process, not just the outcomes? That could be huge for morale." I made a mental note to formalize this idea. Executive engagement rounds, or something similarly official sounding that would justify blocking the time on my calendar. Another small change that could help bridge the gap between leadership and staff, between strategic vision and daily execution. As I headed back to my office, I passed the now empty desk that had once been mine. Someone else would be assigned that space soon, would make it their own, would perhaps begin their own journey within Vertex. Would they encounter the same obstacles I had? The same undervaluation of their contributions? The same expectation of constant sacrifice without appropriate recognition? Not if I had anything to do with it. That was the true promise of my new position, not just personal advancement, but the power to reshape systems and culture for everyone. Back at my desk, I opened my calendar to block time for these new departmental walkthroughs. As I did, I noticed an invitation from Theodore to a private dinner next week at Le Ciel, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants. The note simply read, "To celebrate your first month as COO and discuss next steps, bring your vision for Vertex's future." My vision. Not just implementing others' ideas or maintaining existing systems, but actively shaping what this company could become. I accepted the invitation, then turned to the window as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city. From this height, patterns emerged that weren't visible at street level. The flow of traffic, the relationship between buildings, the overall design of urban space. It was an apt metaphor for my new perspective on Vertex itself, seeing connections and opportunities that had been obscured when I was embedded in day-to-day operations. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dinner Sunday? Dad's coming to the city for his doctor appointment and wants to take his fancy executive daughter out to celebrate." I smiled and replied, "Absolutely. Tell him I'm buying." Another boundary. Established. Protecting family time. Maintaining connections outside of work. Remembering that my value wasn't defined solely by my professional achievements. As I gathered my things to leave for the weekend, Elise appeared in my doorway. "Rachel, sorry to bother you, but Mark just called. The Westridge team has moved up their decision timeline. They want our presentation Monday instead of Wednesday." In the past, this would have meant canceling my weekend plans, working around the clock to accommodate the client's schedule change. The old Rachel would have simply nodded and accepted the inevitability of personal sacrifice. But the new Rachel the COO, Rachel who had found her leverage, considered other options. "Have the team come in tomorrow morning," I said after a moment's thought. "We'll do a 3-hour intensive session, finalize everything, and still have most of our weekends intact. I'll clear it with Mark." Elise looked surprised but pleased. "I'll send out the notification. Do you want me to order in lunch for the team tomorrow?" "Yes, please. And make sure they know this isn't mandatory overtime. It's a special circumstance with comp time available next week." Another change, acknowledging that asking staff to work on weekends should be exceptional, not expected, and should be appropriately compensated. After Elise left, I sent a brief message to Mark explaining the plan. His response came quickly. "Sounds reasonable. I'll be there." 3 months ago, those words would have seemed impossible. Mark Stevens agreeing to a plan that prioritized staff well-being alongside client needs. But the shift in company culture was real, if still fragile and incomplete. As I rode the elevator down to the parking garage, I reflected on how much had changed since that Monday morning email announcing the Thanksgiving skeleton crew. One small act of rebellion, delaying executive payroll by a mere 48 hours, had catalyzed a transformation far beyond what I could have imagined. And it had all started because they'd made me work Thanksgiving week while everyone else vacationed, but forgot that I scheduled all their payroll. Sometimes leverage comes from unexpected places. Sometimes power lies not in formal authority, but in the essential systems and processes that others take for granted. And sometimes, all it takes to change an entrenched culture is one person willing to stand up and say, "I am worth more than this." As I drove home through the darkening city streets, I felt a sense of purpose and possibility that had been missing for too long. The journey wasn't over. Cultural change is never quick or simple, but it had begun in earnest. And I was no longer just maintaining the status quo. I was actively shaping what Vertex could become. A company where contribution was properly valued, where sacrifice was recognized and rewarded, where power was exercised with responsibility rather than privilege. All because I had finally found my leverage and had the courage to use it. 6 months into my role as Chief Operations Officer, Vertex Marketing Group was a different company. The changes weren't immediately visible to outsiders. The logo remained the same, the office address hadn't changed, and our client list still featured the same prestigious names. But beneath the surface, a transformation had taken place that touched every aspect of our organizational culture. The Saturday morning strategy session for the rescheduled Westridge presentation had been a turning point in my relationship with Mark. Faced with a compressed timeline and high stakes, we'd found an unexpected rhythm, each contributing our strengths. Without the power struggles that had characterized our early interactions as CEO and COO. When we stood together before the Westridge executives that Monday, there was a genuine partnership that the clients clearly responded to. We secured the account, the largest in Vertex's history, and celebrated as a unified team. That success had set the tone for our ongoing dynamic. Mark still occasionally bristled when I pushed back on his ideas or introduced initiatives, without extensive consultation, but the sharp edges of resistance had softened into something more productive. We'd developed a shorthand in meetings, a mutual respect that allowed disagreement without animosity. I'd even overheard him defending my decisions to James during a particularly contentious budget allocation discussion. Rachel's approach might be unorthodox, he'd said, but her results speak for themselves. The operational efficiency gains have created room for these new investments. The executive dinner with Theodore at Le Ciel had evolved from a simple celebration into a pivotal planning session. Over exquisite food and aged wine, I'd laid out my comprehensive vision for Vertex's future. Not just incremental improvements to existing processes, but a fundamental reimagining of how we worked, who we hired, and how we defined success. The problem isn't just that we undervalued certain contributions, I explained, gesturing with my fork for emphasis. It's that we measured value through a distorted lens. Client acquisition got celebrated while client retention was taken for granted. Flashy creative concepts earned bonuses while the technical implementation that made them viable was considered just doing your job. People working 80-hour weeks were praised for dedication rather than questioned about sustainability. Theodore nodded thoughtfully, swirling the wine in his glass. And your solution? A holistic reassessment of how we evaluate and reward performance, I said. Balanced metrics that capture the full spectrum of contributions. Structured recognition for the invisible work that keeps this company functioning. And most importantly, a shift from celebrating sacrifice to celebrating efficiency. His eyes had sparked with interest. What does that look like in practice? That question had launched us into a detailed discussion that extended well past dessert, with ideas flowing freely between us. 2 days later, Theodore had approved my proposal for a comprehensive organizational redesign, giving me both the authority and resources to implement changes that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Now, half a year later, those changes were bearing fruit in ways both measurable and intangible. The employee effectiveness program I'd instituted, which included flexible scheduling, remote work options, and mandatory vacation time, had initially been met with skepticism from the old guard. James had openly predicted productivity would plummet. Instead, our output metrics had improved by 22%, while staff turnover had dropped to its lowest level in 5 years. The Cross-Functional Collaboration Initiative, which paired employees from different departments for specific projects and included joint performance evaluations, had broken down silos that had existed since the company's founding. Creatives were now speaking directly with technologists instead of having their ideas filtered through account managers. Back-end developers were participating in client presentations, bringing their expertise to conversations where it had previously been excluded. And perhaps most significantly, the comprehensive value recognition system had replaced our outdated performance review process. No longer were employees evaluated solely on the most visible aspects of their roles or on their willingness to sacrifice personal time. Instead, a nuanced framework acknowledged contributions across multiple dimensions, from innovation to mentorship to operational stability. I was reviewing the quarterly results of these initiatives when Elise appeared at my door, tablet in hand. "The staff satisfaction survey results just came in," she said, her expression giving nothing away. "Do you want them now, or should I schedule time later?" "Now, please," I replied, curious about this first formal assessment of our organizational changes. She handed me the tablet and discreetly withdrew, closing the door behind her. I scrolled through the data, a smile spreading across my face as the numbers told their story. Overall satisfaction had increased by 47%. Work-life balance ratings had nearly doubled, and the most telling metric, whether employees felt their contributions were properly valued, had skyrocketed from a dismal 34% to an impressive 82%. There was still room for improvement, of course. Some departments were adapting more quickly than others. Some managers were embracing the new approaches while others implemented them grudgingly, going through the motions without fully committing to the philosophy behind them. But the direction was unmistakably positive. My phone buzzed with a calendar alert. Time for my weekly walkthrough, today in the account management department. I'd maintained this practice religiously, visiting a different area of the company each week, not to inspect or evaluate, but to connect and understand. It had become one of my favorite parts of the job, a grounding ritual that kept me tuned to the daily realities of our operation, rather than isolated in executive-level abstractions. As I made my way through the building, I noticed small changes that reflected our evolving culture. The lights in empty conference rooms were now programmed to turn off automatically, an energy-saving measure suggested by an administrative assistant during one of our new all-staff idea forums. The break rooms had been redesigned with comfortable seating and better amenities after our wellness survey identified inadequate rest spaces as a common complaint. Even the artwork had changed, rotating exhibitions now featuring pieces created by employees and their family members. In the account management department, I found the team engaged in their weekly planning session, gathered around a digital whiteboard that displayed client timelines and deliverables. They didn't immediately notice me, which was perfect. It gave me a chance to observe the natural flow of their interaction, rather than the more formal version that sometimes emerged when executives were present. "I need to block off Wednesday afternoon for paternity leave planning," one of the managers was saying. "My partner's due date is getting closer, and I want to make sure everything's properly transitioned." "No problem," his colleague replied, without hesitation. "We can shift the Alcor review to Thursday morning. They're flexible. And I can cover the initial client call if needed," offered another team member. "I've been shadowing that account anyway." Simple exchanges, but they represented a profound shift from the culture that had existed before, one where personal needs were often hidden or apologized for, where asking for coverage was seen as weakness rather than normal human requirement. Now it was matter-of-fact, collaborative, solution-oriented. When they finally noticed me leaning against the doorframe, there was a momentary pause, but not the tense straightening of postures or sudden shift to performance mode that had once been common when leadership appeared. "Rachel, perfect timing," called Melissa, the department director. "We were just discussing the new client onboarding protocol you implemented. It's making a huge difference in how quickly we can get projects rolling." "Glad to hear it," I said, stepping fully into the room. "Any suggestions for refinements?" This was another change in approach, actively soliciting feedback rather than treating executive decisions as infallible. It had been uncomfortable at first, both for me and for staff accustomed to a more hierarchical structure. But the quality of insights that emerged when people felt genuinely invited to contribute had proven invaluable. "Actually, yes," said Jordan, one of the senior account executives who had once been notoriously reluctant to speak up in front of leadership. "The technical requirements checklist is comprehensive, but a bit overwhelming for smaller clients. We've been developing a scaled version for projects under a certain budget threshold." "I'd love to see it," I replied sincerely. That kind of adaptive thinking is exactly what makes these systems work in real-world conditions. The walkthrough continued for about 20 minutes, enough time to connect meaningfully without disrupting their workflow. As I was leaving, Melissa walked me to the elevator. "You know," she said quietly, "when you first implemented all these changes, I thought it was just, I don't know, a reaction to what happened during Thanksgiving, a temporary adjustment that would eventually revert to business as usual." I smiled, remembering how distant that catalyzing moment now seemed. "And now?" "Now I can't imagine going back to how we operated before," she admitted. "The team is happier, more productive, more creative. We're doing better work in fewer hours. It's like we were all carrying this invisible weight that's been lifted." That invisible weight. The perfect description of what I'd felt for years. Without fully articulating it, the burden of being undervalued, of having essential contributions treated as expected rather than exceptional, of sacrificing personal time without recognition or reciprocity. "That's exactly what we were aiming for," I told her. "A company where excellence doesn't require martyrdom." Back in my office, I found a meeting request from Theodore for later that afternoon. The subject line simply read, "Future planning," with no additional details. Intrigued, I accepted immediately, then turned my attention to preparing for the quarterly board presentation scheduled for the following week. The numbers told a compelling story. Revenue was up 18% year over year, while costs had decreased by 7% despite investments in new technologies and staff development programs. Employee retention had improved dramatically, reducing the substantial expenses associated with turnover and training. Client satisfaction metrics showed similar gains, with particular improvement in the categories of responsiveness and solution quality. But the most significant transformation wasn't captured in the financial statements or performance dashboards. It was in the intangibles, the energy in the office, the quality of collaboration, the sense of shared purpose that had replaced the often competitive, sometimes resentful dynamic of the past. At precisely 3 p.m., I made my way to Theodore's office, curious about what future planning might entail. When I arrived, I was surprised to find not just Theodore, but also Mark and 2 members of the board, Vivian Chen, no relation to me, and Robert Huang, both known for their strategic focus and progressive approach to business leadership. "Rachel." Theodore greeted me warmly, gesturing to the seating area where the others were already arranged. "Thank you for making time on short notice." "Of course," I replied, taking the remaining seat and glancing around at the unexpected gathering. "I'm intrigued by the mysterious meeting title." Theodore smiled, exchanging glances with the others before leaning forward slightly. "We've been discussing Vertex's long-term strategic direction, particularly in light of the remarkable transformation you've led over the past 6 months." Mark nodded in agreement, which still felt somewhat surreal given our initial friction. The operational model you've implemented has positioned us uniquely in the market. We're not just more profitable, we're more resilient, more innovative, and significantly more attractive to top talent. The board has taken notice, Vivian added, her tone businesslike but approving. The quarterly results exceeded projections by a substantial margin, and the qualitative indicators are equally impressive. I waited, sensing there was more to this meeting than a simple performance review. "We've been approached about an acquisition," Theodore said, confirming my suspicion that something significant was brewing. Northern Star Media Group is looking to expand their marketing division, and our recent performance has made us a prime target. Northern Star was a media conglomerate with global reach, known for strategic acquisitions that expanded their integrated service offerings. Being on their radar was flattering but potentially concerning, as their acquisition history included examples of both thoughtful integration and dismantling for parts. "What's their offer?" I asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. Robert slid a document across the table. "The financial terms are exceptional, significantly above market valuation, with generous retention packages for key executives." I scanned the numbers, impressed despite my reservations. The offer would make Theodore's founder shares worth a fortune, and the executive compensation packages, including mine, were indeed generous. But acquisitions were rarely just about money. "And the operational independence?" I asked, looking up from the document. "What happens to the culture we've built, the systems we've put in place?" Theodore's expression softened. "That's precisely why you're in this meeting, Rachel. Before we engage seriously with Northern Star, we wanted your assessment. Would this acquisition strengthen what we've built or threaten it?" The fact that this question was being posed, that my evaluation of cultural and operational impact was considered essential to the decision, represented perhaps the most profound change of all. 6 months ago, such a discussion would have happened behind closed doors, with only financial metrics and market positioning considered relevant. "I'll need to review their corporate culture and integration history more thoroughly," I said, already mentally mapping out the research required. But my initial concern would be preservation of our operational model. The changes we've implemented aren't just about efficiency metrics. They're about fundamentally redefining how value is created and recognized. Mark nodded. "That's been my reservation as well. The financial offer is compelling, but if it comes at the cost of reverting to a more traditional corporate structure." "There's another option on the table," Vivian interjected, looking to Theodore for confirmation before continuing. "The board has discussed the possibility of a different kind of transition, one that would maintain our independence while still creating significant value for shareholders." Theodore took over. "I've been considering stepping back from day-to-day operations for some time. Not retirement exactly, but a shift to a less active role, perhaps as chairman while transferring executive leadership." My mind raced ahead, seeing where this conversation was leading. "You're considering an internal succession plan instead of an acquisition." "Yes," Theodore confirmed. "Specifically, we're exploring a co-leadership model, with Mark continuing as CEO focusing on external relationships and market strategy, while you would be elevated to president, overseeing all internal operations and organizational development." The proposal was unexpected, but intuitively right. A formal recognition of the balance Mark and I had been developing, playing to our respective strengths while maintaining the cultural and operational advances of the past 6 months. The board believes this structure would position Vertex for sustainable growth while preserving what makes us unique in the market, Robert explained. And it would create a clear path for eventual full leadership transition without disruption. "What are your thoughts?" Theodore asked, studying my reaction carefully. I considered the question, not just as a career opportunity, but as a responsibility to the organization we'd been reshaping. "I think it has tremendous potential," I said finally. Mark and I have found an effective dynamic, and formalizing that partnership makes strategic sense. But I'd want certain guarantees about maintaining our operational philosophy, not just for now, but embedded in governance structures. That's precisely what we hoped you'd say, Theodore replied with evident satisfaction. We'd like you to draft those guarantees as part of developing this succession plan. What would need to be formalized to ensure the changes you've led remain foundational to Vertex's identity, regardless of future leadership transitions? The conversation continued for another hour, exploring the practical and strategic dimensions of this potential new direction. By the time we concluded, a framework had emerged, a structured transition over 12 months with clearly defined roles and authorities, and most importantly, codified principles that would guide Vertex's operations and culture regardless of who occupied the executive offices. As I walked back to my office afterward, I felt a sense of completion that went beyond professional accomplishment. This wasn't just about a title or compensation. It was about building something sustainable, something that reflected values I believed in deeply. The values my mother had instilled in me, about knowing my worth and creating environments where others could recognize theirs as well. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Dinner with Dad at 7, right? He's already talking about his executive daughter to anyone who will listen." I smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. The balance I'd fought for extended beyond work. Hours now. Regular family dinners, weekend hikes, even a book club I'd joined that had nothing to do with business or professional development. The parts of life I'd sacrificed for years had been reclaimed, not as occasional exceptions, but as normal, expected, valued components of a well-lived existence. In my office, I found a small gift box on my desk with a note from Zoe. 6 months. Ego today. Never forget your leverage. Inside was a custom-made paperweight, crystal clear with an embedded image that made me laugh out loud. A tiny calendar page showing Thanksgiving week with a payroll schedule prominently displayed. Such a small action it had been, in retrospect. A minor adjustment to a payment processing timeline, made in a moment of justifiable frustration. Not malicious, not vengeful, just a quiet assertion of value. A small reminder that even the most seemingly powerful people depend on systems and processes they take for granted, maintained by people whose contributions often go unrecognized. I placed the paperweight prominently on my desk, a tangible reminder of how significant change can emerge from seemingly small moments of self-advocacy, of how standing up for your own worth can create ripples that transform an entire organization. My computer chimed with an incoming email, the final proposal for our Employee Wellness Center, a project I'd championed that would provide on-site childcare, fitness facilities, and mental health resources. The budget had initially seemed ambitious, but the projected returns in terms of productivity and retention had won over even the most skeptical board members. Construction would begin next month. As I approved the document, I thought about the version of Rachel who had received that Thanksgiving staffing email 6 months ago. The reliable, accommodating, undervalued Rachel who had swallowed her frustration and disappointment countless times before. Who had built systems and solved problems and kept things running smoothly without proper recognition. Who had watched others advance while remaining stuck in a role that utilized her skills without honoring her potential. That Rachel had finally reached her breaking point, had finally found her leverage and used it, not to harm or punish, but to correct a fundamental imbalance, to assert her true value, to transform not just her own circumstances, but an entire corporate culture that had drifted away from its founding principles. At 6:30 p.m., I closed my laptop and prepared to leave for dinner with my father. As I gathered my things, Mark appeared in my doorway, a folder in hand. "I've been reviewing the draft succession announcement," he said, stepping into my office. "It's solid, but I wanted to discuss the timing. The board is pushing for sooner rather than later." 6 months ago, this kind of end-of-day interruption would have automatically extended my workday, delaying personal plans without question or apology. But the culture had changed. I had changed it, and now different boundaries existed. "I'd be happy to discuss it first thing tomorrow," I said, continuing to gather my things. "I have dinner plans with my father tonight." "Of course," Mark replied without hesitation. "Family comes first. We can catch up in the morning." Simple words, but they represented a seismic shift in expectations and values. The automatic prioritization of work over personal commitments was no longer the default. The assumption that executives would sacrifice everything else for the company had been replaced by a more humane, more sustainable approach to professional dedication. As I rode the elevator down to the parking garage, I thought again about leverage, about the power that comes not from titles or authority, but from understanding your true value and insisting that others recognize it too. They had made me work Thanksgiving week while everyone else vacationed, but they had forgotten I scheduled all their payroll. And that one oversight, that one moment of taking the wrong person for granted, had catalyzed a transformation that none of us could have anticipated. Now, as I stepped out into the early evening sunshine, I carried with me not just the title of Chief Operations Officer and soon-to-be President, but something far more valuable: the deep, unshakable knowledge of my worth, and the commitment to creating systems and cultures where everyone's contributions were properly valued, properly recognized, and properly rewarded. Sometimes the greatest leverage isn't found in grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but in the quiet, essential functions that others depend on without realizing it. And sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply, "I am worth more than this, and I won't settle for less anymore." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.